In the heart of Houston, Texas, a dark tale of obsession and betrayal unfolds. Zariah was a rising star in Houston's social scene, adored for her beauty and magnetic presence. Donovan was a powerful real estate mogul, his wealth and charm commanding attention wherever he went. Together, they were the city's most talked about couple, unstoppable, untouchable, the perfect match made for the spotlight. But everything changed in an instant. One night, what was supposed to be the happiest day of Zariah's life turned into something far darker. A confrontation with the man who controlled not just her career, but her every move, would lead to a shocking twist. Words were exchanged, sharp, bitter, and in a single moment of rage, a life was lost. The stunning life of Zariah Johnson, taken away in the heat of that moment. No one saw it coming. No one could have predicted what happened next. The perfect life, the perfect love story, shattered. How does a relationship built on luxury, power, and trust unravel so violently? How does love turn into possession, and betrayal become the deadliest weapon? Before we dive into this shocking case, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more chilling tales of love, lies, and betrayal. At just 23 years old, Zariah Z. Johnson had already captured the hearts and imaginations of millions. With her stunning beauty and effortlessly glamorous lifestyle, she quickly became a fixture in Houston's social scene, and it wasn't long before the world took notice. She was an aspiring model and beauty influencer. Instagram was a parade of luxurious vacations, high-end photo shoots, and designer outfits that seemed to fall right out of a dream. She was living a life that many could only fantasize about, but beneath the surface, there was more to Z than the world saw. Z wasn't just another pretty face chasing fame, she had big plans. The influencer lifestyle was her stepping stone, a way to break into the entertainment industry and build a career that went beyond curated photos and likes. She wasn't content with simply being the girl everyone admired from afar. She wanted to be known for her talent, her drive, and the kind of success that wasn't handed to her but earned through hard work and vision. But as she looked to the future, she needed a way to elevate herself, to enter the elite circles that could open doors to her dreams. Then came Donovan "Don" Huxley. At 48, Don was a towering figure in Houston. A real estate mogul with a net worth in the hundreds of millions, he was a man who lived by his own rules. With sharp suits and a smile that could disarm anyone, Don commanded respect in every room he walked into. But it wasn't just his wealth that made him powerful, it was his ability to connect with people, to make them feel like they were the most important person in the room. His charm was magnetic, and it didn't take long for him to spot Z at a high-end charity event. She was young, stunning, and already drawing attention from the right people. To Don, she was more than just eye candy, she was a potential asset. The two exchanged pleasantries, and before long, Don made his move. He offered Z financial support, something that could boost her brand and help her reach the next level. In return, he wanted her company, at least, that's what he told her. At first, it seemed like a fair deal. Z was flattered by the attention from someone so influential, and she saw the opportunity to grow her career. A little help from someone who knew the ins and outs of Houston's elite circles couldn't hurt, right? But what started as a simple business arrangement soon spiraled into something more. Don's interest in Z became more intense, his possessiveness hidden behind his charming smile and gifts. As the weeks went on, what was supposed to be a mutually beneficial relationship began to blur the lines between business and something else entirely. Don's attention was no longer just about helping her career, it was about controlling it. And soon, it wasn't just her career he wanted to control. Their relationship became the talk of the city. The press couldn't get enough of the older mogul and the beautiful young model. Every event they attended together made headlines, an alluring power couple that no one could take their eyes off of. Their social media posts were perfect, curated moments of romance and luxury. On the surface, they were everything people dreamed of, glamorous, powerful, and untouchable. But behind those picture-perfect posts was a different story. A story that no one could see. A story of rising tension, of love turning into something darker. The more time they spent together, the more Dawn's control over Z seemed to tighten, and the more her dreams began to slip further out of her reach, consumed by the life she'd been swept into. As the cameras flashed and the social media likes piled up, Z couldn't help but wonder if she was losing herself in the very thing she'd once dreamt of. As Z's career continued to soar, she began to feel the weight of the life she had been thrust into. At first, the glamorous world of high-profile events and designer labels had felt like a dream, but now, as the months went on, it began to feel more like a gilded cage. She had achieved success beyond her wildest dreams, but there was something missing, a sense of control over her own future, a desire for independence that was slowly growing within her. Z knew she couldn't keep living like this. The fame, the luxury, it was all intoxicating, but she couldn't ignore the growing feeling that she was becoming a pawn in Don's game. His gifts, his affection, his promises of more, none of it had the same sparkle anymore. She needed more than just the surface-level gloss of a life filled with expensive things. She wanted a life where she wasn't controlled by anyone, where her choices were her own, and where her success was built on her terms. That's when she met Chris Rivers. Chris was 28 years old, a young entrepreneur who had already made a name for himself in the tech industry. He wasn't part of the established circles Dawn was used to. He wasn't the kind of man who needed to buy his way into success, he had earned it. His ambition was raw, his vision clear. They met at a networking event, where Chris was giving a presentation on his latest business venture. Chris wasn't dazzled by her beauty or impressed by her social status. He saw her for who she truly was, smart, driven, and capable of so much more than just being a pretty face on Instagram. Their connection was instant. They shared late-night conversations about their dreams, their passions, and the kind of life they both wanted to build. Chris didn't want to control her, he wanted to partner with her. He wanted to help her see that she could have everything she wanted, without being at the mercy of anyone else. Their relationship was secret at first, hidden away from the public eye. Z knew that if Dawn found out, things would spiral quickly, but she couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward Chris. They began sneaking around, meeting in quiet places, texting late into the night, planning a life that had nothing to do with Dawn Huxley's world. Chris was everything Dawn wasn't, free, independent, and full of possibilities. With Chris, Z could imagine a future where she wasn't controlled by power, money, or manipulation. But Dawn wasn't blind to what was happening. As his obsession with Z deepened, his need to control her grew more intense. The gifts, the lavish dinners, the endless praise, it was all part of a strategy to keep her close. When Z started pulling away, Dawn felt the first flicker of real fear. She was slipping through his fingers, and that was something he couldn't allow. The more distant she became, the more possessive Dawn grew. He couldn't stand the thought of losing her, not just because of the life they shared, but because he couldn't stand the idea of anyone else having her. The anger inside him began to boil over. He showered her with more lavish presents, trying to buy her affection, but Z could see through it. The gestures no longer felt like love, they felt like a way to keep her in line, to remind her that she was his. Then came the night he found out about Chris. Z had been careful not to let anything slip. But Dawn had eyes everywhere. One of his associates had seen her with Chris, and soon the whole thing was out in the open. When Dawn confronted her, his rage was uncontrollable. His charming facade crumbled, revealing the true darkness behind it all. Dawn was a man who never thought he could lose. To him, Z wasn't just his girlfriend, she was an investment, something he controlled, something he owned. And now that someone else had taken her attention, he couldn't accept it. His anger turned into threats. He warned Z that if she left him, if she tried to go to Chris, he would destroy her career. He knew too much. He had too much power. He had been recording their most intimate moments, every secret, every private conversation. He knew what made her tick, what terrified her, and he was willing to use all of it to keep her under his thumb. The manipulation was ruthless. He told her that if she ever tried to leave, he would expose everything, the things she didn't want anyone to know. The things she had trusted him with. He promised he would ruin her, that no one would ever work with her again. Her career, her reputation, everything she had worked for, it would all be gone in an instant. For a while, Z felt trapped. The fear Dawn instilled in her was real. She didn't know what he might do next. But Chris was there, always there, supporting her and telling her she could be free. He wanted to build a life with her, one where she didn't have to look over her shoulder, one where she could be her true self. But the more Dawn tightened his grip, the more desperate Z became. She knew she couldn't keep living this way, torn between two worlds, suffocated by a man who refused to let her go. Dawn's obsession with her had reached a boiling point, and the question was no longer if she would escape, it was when. As the days passed, Z's relationship with Chris deepened, and with each passing moment, she felt a sense of liberation she had never known before. No longer shackled by Dawn's control, Z started to believe in a future that was entirely her own. She dreamed of a life with Chris, one where she could finally be herself, free from the ever-tightening grip of the man who had once seemed like her ticket to fame. But Dawn wasn't the type of man to let go easily. His obsession had only grown over time, and now, it was eating him alive. He couldn't accept that Z might choose someone else. He couldn't accept that she was rejecting him, the man who had given her everything, luxury, fame, everything she had ever wanted. Desperation began to take over him. He called her, pleading with her one last time. He promised her more, the kind of life she could only dream of. He promised fame beyond what Chris could offer. He told her that he loved her, that she couldn't walk away from him. But Z had made up her mind. She was done. She had finally broken free from the chains that had bound her, and there was no turning back. She was ready to start a new life with Chris, a life where she could breathe again. But Dawn didn't see it that way. He couldn't. That night, as Z was preparing to marry Chris, the future she had been dreaming of, the future she had fought so hard to reach, seemed so close, just within her grasp. She was at her penthouse, packing for the day she had been waiting for. The air was thick with excitement and anticipation, but it was also thick with something darker, something she couldn't see yet. Dawn showed up uninvited, as he always did when things weren't going his way. No one had expected him to come. Everyone had assumed he had given up, but deep down, Z knew he wasn't going to just let go. She had no idea how far he was willing to go to keep her in his life. The doorbell rang, and when Z opened it, there stood Dawn. His presence alone was enough to send a chill down her spine. The tension in the room was palpable, the kind of tension you could feel crawling under your skin. He didn't even give her a chance to speak before he began, his voice low, but full of desperation. Z, you can't do this, Dawn pleaded. You don't know what you're throwing away. Everything I've given you, all the opportunities, the fame. You think Chris can give you all of that? He's nothing. He's not me. Z, calm yet resolute, stood her ground. I'm done, Dawn. It's over. You need to accept that. I don't want this life anymore. I don't want you in my life anymore. Her words hung in the air, but Dawn's expression twisted with rage. The man who had once charmed her with his smile and his gifts now looked like a stranger, a man driven by his own twisted need to control her. The man she thought she knew was gone. He took a step closer, his breath coming faster, his eyes burning with fury. You think you can just walk away? You think you can leave me and walk into some fairy tale with him? No one leaves me. Not you. Not anyone. Z backed away, her heart pounding in her chest. She had seen this side of him before, the side of him that no longer cared about love, only about ownership. But she stood firm. I'm not yours to control anymore. I've made my decision, Dawn. The anger that had been building up inside him finally erupted. In one swift motion, Dawn pulled a gun from inside his jacket, a gun she never expected him to have. Z's eyes widened in shock as he pointed it at her, his face twisted with madness. You think you can just walk away from me? I gave you everything. You'll regret this. Before she could even react, before she could plead or try to calm him down, Dawn fired. The sound of the gunshot was deafening in the small penthouse, and Z's body jerked with the force of the bullets. 1, 2, 3, 3 shots, each one tearing through her chest, each one ending the life of the woman who had once dreamed of freedom. She fell to the ground, her body crumpling in a pool of blood. Don stood over her, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with a kind of sick triumph. For a moment, it seemed like he might feel something, regret, guilt, anything, but there was nothing. No remorse. Only the cold satisfaction of having controlled her, even in death. But Don wasn't done yet. In a final, twisted act of control, he staged the scene. He carefully positioned Z's body, making sure it looked like a suicide. A final, desperate act of despair from the woman who had tried to escape him. He wiped down the gun, leaving no trace of his fingerprints, then slipped out of the penthouse as quietly as he had come, leaving behind a trail of blood, broken dreams, and unanswered questions. When the police arrived, they were met with a scene that didn't quite add up. Everything pointed to suicide, but something felt off. The questions lingered in the air, heavy with uncertainty. Why would Z, a woman with so much to live for, take her own life just as she was about to start a new chapter with Chris? Why would someone who had fought so hard for independence suddenly give up? The answers would come, but they would come too late. Don had already vanished, his life of luxury and control continuing on as if nothing had ever happened. But for Z, there would be no more chances, no more dreams, no more freedom. Her life was over, and with it, the brutal, toxic hold Don had on her. The news of Z's death sent shockwaves through Houston. It wasn't just the loss of a glamorous model, a young woman whose beauty and ambition had captivated the city, it was the brutal, senseless way in which she had been taken from the world. Fans, friends, and family were left reeling, unable to comprehend the tragedy. How could someone like Z, so full of life and promise, be gone in an instant? How could her future, the future she had fought so hard to carve out for herself, be ripped away by the one person who should have been her protector, not her tormentor? For those who knew Z, it was impossible to believe that she would take her own life. The image of the glamorous, carefree model, living a life of fame and privilege, now seemed so far removed from the cold, bloody reality of her death. But that's exactly what many tried to accept at first, a tragic suicide from a woman who had everything but couldn't handle the pressure of it all. Yet, there was something about the scene that didn't add up. Something in the way Z's body was positioned, the way the gun was placed, made those close to her question if there was more to the story. As the days passed, the truth began to surface, slowly, but inevitably. The police had started their investigation, and they weren't convinced by the suicide theory. They began to piece together the fragments of Z's life in the days leading up to her death, speaking to her friends, her colleagues, and anyone who might have had contact with her. What they uncovered was chilling. It wasn't just that Z had been trying to escape an abusive relationship, it was that she had been trying to escape Don Huxley's iron grip for months. The police soon discovered Don's history of manipulation and possessiveness. He had kept tabs on her every move, using his wealth and influence to maintain control over her. He had showered her with gifts, promises of fame and success, but beneath the surface, he had been smothering her, pushing her further away. And when he realized she was serious about leaving him, when she found someone else who truly cared for her, his obsession turned toxic. Don had warned her that if she left him, he would ruin her. And now, in the wake of her death, those words rang true. The investigation led the police to Don's mansion, where they uncovered further evidence of his twisted obsession. They found footage of Z, captured in intimate moments without her knowledge, and threatening messages he had sent her in the days before the murder. It was clear that Don had been trying to manipulate her, to guilt her into staying with him. But when he realized he was losing his hold on her, his anger turned deadly. The gunshots that ended Z's life were no longer a random act of violence, they were the final, desperate actions of a man who couldn't bear to let go. Don had tried to cover his tracks, but the evidence was mounting against him. The police were closing in, and it wasn't long before they made the arrest. Don Huxley, the once respected mogul, was taken into custody, his world crumbling around him. The man who had once been the face of luxury and power was now the face of a chilling crime that had rocked an entire city. The media frenzy that followed was relentless. Don, who had once been a respected figure in Houston's elite circles, was now vilified. His face, once seen on billboards and magazine covers, was now plastered across every news outlet, every social media feed. The public was stunned by the revelation that a man so powerful, so wealthy, could become so consumed by jealousy and obsession. How had it come to this? How could someone who had everything be willing to destroy the life of a young woman who had been trying to escape him? As the details of the murder spread, Z's fans flooded social media with tributes, each one more heartbreaking than the last. They shared memories of her, of the moments that made them feel connected to her, of the woman who had inspired so many with her strength and beauty. But with the tributes came the questions. How had this happened? How had Don, a man who was supposed to be a pillar of the community, turned into a monster? How had he allowed his obsession with Z to spiral so far out of control? As the investigation unfolded, the true scope of Don's control over Z became clear. The more the public learned, the more they understood just how dangerous a man like Don could be when consumed by obsession. The story of Z's life, her dreams, and her tragic death became a cautionary tale, a story of how power, control, and jealousy can destroy everything in their path. And as Don sat in a jail cell, waiting for the trial that would inevitably come, the city of Houston was left with a haunting question: how could someone who had everything, wealth, power, and influence, end up losing everything because of the one thing he couldn't control, his own emotions? The trial of Don Huxley became a spectacle that captured the attention of the nation. What had once been a case confined to Houston's elite circles was now thrust into the spotlight. The courtroom was filled with tension as each day brought more revelations, more shocking details about the man who had once seemed untouchable. Don, once the face of power and influence in Houston, now sat in a courtroom, his fate hanging in the balance. Don's defense team tried to paint a picture of a man deeply in love, a man who had been betrayed by the woman he had given everything to. They argued that his actions, though extreme, were driven by heartbreak, by a passion so deep that it blinded him to the consequences of his actions. They portrayed Don as a victim of his own emotions, a man who had been led to believe that he could not live without Z, and that her departure had pushed him to the brink of madness. The defense sought to cast doubt on his intentions, claiming that his actions had been an unfortunate reaction to his overwhelming feelings of betrayal. But the prosecution presented a very different picture. They laid bare the truth of Don's behavior, revealing a pattern of manipulation, control, and emotional abuse that had been hidden behind his charming facade for years. Friends and colleagues testified about the way Don had systematically tried to isolate Z from those who cared about her, how he had showered her with gifts and promises, only to demand complete loyalty in return. His possessiveness had escalated over time, and when Z had finally found the courage to leave him, Don had been unable to accept it. The prosecution painted him not as a heartbroken lover, but as a predator who had sought to control every aspect of Z's life. His love, it seemed, had never been about care, it had been about ownership. The courtroom drama intensified with every passing day. The evidence against Don mounted, but so did the public's divided opinion. Some saw him as a man who had lost everything to a woman who had betrayed him, while others saw him as the face of toxic obsession, a man who had allowed his need for control to spiral out of control. When the jury finally deliberated, the tension was palpable. After days of back and forth, of examining every detail of Don's actions, the jury returned with their verdict. Don Huxley was found guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom fell silent as the judge announced the sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. There was no leniency, no chance for redemption. Don's actions had been too far gone, his obsession too consuming to be excused. Z had been taken from this world in a brutal, senseless act, and the jury's decision was a statement that would not be ignored. For Z's family, the verdict brought a sense of closure, but it didn't erase the pain. They would never get her back, never see her smile, never hear her voice again. The justice they had fought for was not enough to undo the damage that had been done. They had lost their daughter, their sister, their friend, and no amount of legal proceedings could change that. But as the case moved to its conclusion, a deeper investigation began to unravel even darker truths. The authorities, in their quest for justice, discovered that Don's history of manipulation and control went far beyond his relationship with Z. There were whispers, rumors about other women who had been involved with Don in the past, women who had disappeared from his life without explanation, women whose relationships with him had ended under strange and troubling circumstances. Some had spoken out about the ways in which Don had used his wealth and influence to keep them quiet, while others had simply vanished without a trace. It became clear that Don's manipulative behavior had been a pattern, one that had gone unchecked for years, allowed to thrive in the shadows of his wealth and status. The revelation sent shockwaves through the public. Don's conviction was no longer just about the murder of one woman, it was about the larger, darker picture of a man who had used his power to control and manipulate anyone who crossed his path. His wealth had allowed him to escape scrutiny for far too long, and now the truth was coming to light. Z's death had sparked a conversation about the dangers of toxic relationships, about the ways in which power and control could turn deadly when left unchecked. Her story became a symbol of the risks women face when they are subjected to the whims of those who think they can own them. The case also raised broader questions about how society views love, jealousy, and possession, how a relationship that seems to be built on affection can quickly devolve into something far more sinister. For many, Z's story was a cautionary tale, a warning about the lengths to which some people would go to maintain control over those they loved. It was a reminder that power, when abused, could have devastating consequences. And while Don Huxley's conviction brought some measure of justice, the scars of his actions would never fully heal. The damage he had caused was deep, and it would take time for the city, and for those who knew Z, to come to terms with the full extent of the devastation he had left in his wake. This story is a tragic reminder of how far some will go to maintain control over others. Zariah Z. Johnson's life was brutally stolen by a man who couldn't accept her independence, her love, or her freedom. This is the dark side of obsession, where love turns into possession, and betrayal becomes a deadly weapon. Could Z's death have been avoided if she had left Don sooner? How do we stop these toxic relationships before they turn fatal? If this story shocked you, like and subscribe for more cases that explore the darkest intersections of love, lies, and betrayal.